Presbyterian Church in Jackson, Tennessee, and this is our Lenten devotional series. So today I want to share a verse that came up in my own personal devotional time this morning. This is 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10, which tells us, like good stewards of the manifold grace of God, serve one another with whatever gift each of you has received. So I'm struck by a couple of things with this verse. The first is just thinking of what it means to be a steward, which means that the thing that is in our care is not something that we own. So in this case, God's grace, which we are told we are stewards of, that grace is not our grace, but God's grace. And the other thing that I'm struck with is thinking about how to be a good steward of God's grace. I think typically when we think of being good stewards, we tend to think about maybe material resources, things like money or possessions that we care for. And we often think to be good stewards of those things means that we have to be fairly frugal. We have to conserve those things. We have to make sure that we're using them wisely so that there will be enough for later or on down the road. Same thing if we think about being good stewards of God's creation, of natural resources. If we think about being good stewards of this earth, then we think in terms of being sure we're not overusing resources, but using our resources in such a way that they will last and be here for the next generation, for our children and our grandchildren. So we tend to think of being good stewards in a way that's frugal, in a way that conserves, in a way that is efficient. But I don't think that's what is intended in this verse. When we think about being good stewards of God's grace, what does that mean? Well, again, God's grace is not ours. It's, according to this verse, entrusted into our care. But, unlike the material resources or natural resources of this world that are finite, God's grace is infinite and it is boundless. It can't be contained. And it is not ours to try to hold on to. It's not ours to try to hoard and keep for ourselves. But instead, to be good stewards of God's grace means that we should be sharing that grace, that we should be showing that grace to all that we come in contact with. And we're told how to do that in this verse. For we are told that we should serve one another with whatever gift each of you has received. So whatever your gift is, whether it's singing or music, if it's writing, if it's speaking, if it's listening, if it's, just being there for a friend, for serving another person, whatever that gift is, we should share those gifts with one another to show God's grace. We shouldn't hold those gifts back. We shouldn't hoard them for ourselves, but instead we should lavish those gifts on one another. And verse 11 tells us that if we do this, if we share God's grace to the fullest, then God may be glorified in all things through Jesus Christ. To him belong the glory and the power forever and ever. So may it be so with all of us, especially during this season of Lent. So I hope you're staying healthy and safe, and we will see you back here next time. Thanks be to God. Amen.